Welcome, everybody. My name is Sage Rountree, and I have with me my co-author, Alexandra DeSiato. We have written together 4 books, so here they all are. And this is the most recent one. We are meeting live on Thursday, July 16th. This book came out 2 days ago. It is available in paperback, it is available in ebook format, and it is available in audiobook format, where Alexandra and I alternate the chapters as we read. And I think that is a really sweet way to enjoy listening to it. I am the founder of Comfort Zone Yoga, and that's where we are meeting right now. The live call is going on in Comfort Zone Conversations, which is a live monthly experience that we have, almost an extension of my podcast called Yoga Teacher Confidential. And if you're a fan of the podcast, you will recognize Alexandra from the cover art because she and I are together on the cover. Alexandra, I think you may be muted, but I'm not sure. But why don't you unmute and introduce yourselves
I
and introduce yourself to
I
us?
sure will. That's right. And the cover of your podcast, I'm the whispering friend there. It's a great picture. Such a cute picture of you. So, hi everyone. I'm Alexandra DeSiato. Sage has been my yoga mentor for 15-ish years. And we've been writing together now for about 10. Is that right, Sage? About 10 years we've been writing together off and on.
Think, yes. When did
Oh,
Lifelong Yoga come out? I'm
2017.
gonna look.
It's like
I'm
nine
gonna
or
look while you talk. I think
yeah.
that sounds about right.
Been a while. And we just really enjoy writing together, and I really enjoy learning from her. So I'm delighted to be here with you all today to talk about our newest book, Yoga Off the Mat.
Yoga Off the Mat. This book is a little bit different from our more recent pair of books. And I know that several people who are watching are big fans of this one. This is a bestseller, although I'm happy to say, according to Amazon, Yoga Off the Mat is now also a bestseller. But this is our book on theming yoga classes, on bringing yoga philosophy into your classroom in ways that make it digestible and relatable for your students. And then last year, we wrote this sequel. It's all new material. So if you know and loved the first one, you definitely also want to get volume 2. It is not a revised edition. It is a whole new second volume with an evolved theming template with 54 new themes for you. So those were written for those of us who are yoga teachers. Yoga Off the Mat is what I've been calling a Gen Pop book. It is a book not only for yoga teachers, but for anybody who is interested in what that experience is in yoga class that makes you go, there's something to this. And for some of us, especially those of us who go on to become yoga teachers, we get that glimmer maybe in our very first class, especially in our very first Shavasana. We think there's something deeper at play here. And this book is here to shine a light on what that deeper thing might be. So it is not only for those of us who teach yoga, it is for you to hand to your students. It is for you to mention to your students and your friends who are interested in what is the special secret sauce in the yoga practice? What is really going on underneath everything? So today we are going to talk about the book. We'll each do a short reading. We can talk about our process, and we would be delighted to answer any of your questions. Those of you on the live call can use that question button you see at the bottom of the screen. And if you're watching this later on YouTube, drop your question in the comments. I will be happy to answer for you later. So with that, Alexandra, where has yoga philosophy helped you this week? Can you think of any?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. My birthday is on Saturday. And so as I move toward my birthday every year, I find myself getting like very philosophical about life in general. And I found myself thinking this week about the sort of framing the experience of life, thinking about it as an assignment. Like if you had to articulate what is the assignment of life, that's kind of what I've been playing with a little bit. And yoga absolutely informs my thinking about that because of course I think the assignment of life is, to bring joy to other people, to experience joy and beauty, to be kind, to share in the abundance we all have, to celebrate all the good in the world. But one way that yoga philosophy, I mean, certainly yoga philosophy informs that thinking on the assignment, but also one way it really informs my thinking about this concept is that when we think of an assignment, we might think of something that we can pass or fail. And I think that yoga philosophy really reminds us that life is not a pass or fail assignment. It's a classroom where we're just constantly learning and constantly growing. And so I've been thinking about yoga philosophy in that context this week. What about you, Sage?
That's awesome. I love that. And happy birthday.
Thank you.
For me, it always comes back to to the interplay between sthira and sukha, between tapas and ishvara pranidhana, between controlling the controllables and then releasing control on the uncontrollables. And one thing that I always feel, this is my 13th book experience, my 13th book pub week and book promotion experience. And it always feels like, I had a sweet conversation with a wonderful yoga teacher called Sandy Raper, who has a podcast called Beyond Yoga Teacher Training as part of my book tour promo. And she said, yeah, when you write a book and you put it out in the world, it's almost like having another child. And I remember thinking early on when my first book came out, my children were pretty small. So that was 2008. So Lily would have been 7 or 8, and Vivi would have been 5 or 6, and they were at swim lessons, like right after the book came out. And I was up on the track walking around, and the track had windows where you could look down on the pool where the swim lessons were. And I remember walking by and seeing them out there swimming back and forth, like on their own. And I was like, whoa, that's the feeling of having the book go out in the world. It's like, well, I did what I could to like get them into the pool, and now they have to sink or swim on their own. And they had their swim instructor, of course, not like I put them in the pool and then walked away. But knowing that you have done what you can and controlled the controllables, lots of tapas, lots of effort, lots of dedication and zeal go into producing any long form content. But then once it's out there, you just have to release your attachment to the results. We hope this book lands with people on the call, people watching the recording, people reading the book in whatever format they choose to interact with it. But that's kind of out of our control, and that is always my life's work is like discern, is it in your control or is it not? And if it's not, how can you just practice acceptance, equanimity, and being okay with relinquishing the fruits of your labors? All you can really do is the labor part.
You and I have been talking about yoga philosophy for a lot of years now. And one of the things that I think has become so increasingly obvious to me is that there are both endless yoga philosophy themes to discuss, and then there are also just 10 or 5, whatever. It's these ideas that you're talking about. You're talking about the lesson of letting from chapter 35 of the book. We're talking about, but I think you could apply it to like so many chapters from the book. This reminder that like there's only so much we can do, and then we let the world take over from there. But we talk about these ideas again and again because these are the ideas of life, and we need the constant reminder. You don't just learn that once, like let me control what's in my control and let everything else go. We need to be reminded to do that, to act on that, like I feel like every 5 minutes really, but so.
I love it. And that is pointing to this central teaching theme that I hit hard with my friends at Comfort Zone Yoga, which is that it's not only okay to repeat your lesson plans, your themes, your sequences. That's actually how students learn, is that this repetition is so key to their learning. The repetition is so key to their learning. The repetition is so key to their learning. People have to hear things many times before they land. And even if we are teaching ourselves the same lesson in a growing spiral, we see it differently every time we come back to it. And I think that you would agree. That's certainly experience I had revisiting some of these concepts as we were drafting the book, was that they land a little differently when you're in your 50s than they did when you were in your 30s, or when you're at a different stage of parenting or a different stage in your physical or metaphysical yoga practice. Coming back to the same lessons, coming back to the same seminal text is always going to shine some different light on it and to make it look a little bit different.
No, and I also really love that about yoga philosophy, that it's not a dogmatic philosophical, practice, spiritual practice. We come to it and we interpret it in a way that makes sense to us in the moment in our lives, and we take from it what we need then. And so it's no wonder that it changes over time. And I have no doubt that we'll look back on this book in 10 years and we'll read it, the words we've written, and go like, oh, that still resonates. Or like, oh, I think I would think of that differently now. And both of those things are great. That's as it should be.
I love it. I love it. Speaking of now and now, Atta is the opening word of the Yoga Sutras. And in this book, I like to tell my favorite joke that I know I also told when we were together on the podcast. And now, the HBO original series. And now it is time for reading from the book. I'm going to read a chapter, and then Alexandra will read a chapter. We can have a little conversation about them. So the chapter I am going to read is one that I did talk about on a couple podcasts. One was on the Theme Weavers podcast, with Heidi Kastner. Last week I was on, and that came out a week ago Thursday. I will link it in the call replay notes when this goes up on YouTube. And I also talk about one of the concepts here with Sandy on Beyond Yoga Teacher Training, and I'll unpack that for you at the end. I want to point out with the visual, since I'm holding the physical book, that you can see each of these chapters is very short. This reading I'm about to do to you is 2 pages. And then we have an actions box, which suggests some actions that you can take in order to really integrate this lesson in your life. And I think for those of us who teach yoga, these actions might be prompts that you can share with your students. So here we go with chapter 22, Suffering is Inevitable. The Yoga Sutras tell us that suffering, dukkha, that has not yet arisen may be avoided. We cannot avoid all suffering, nor should we. Suffering is an innate part of life, and it is an experience that connects us all in our shared humanity. But we can minimize our role in creating or adding to our own future suffering and the suffering of others. Suffering often happens when we jump out of the present moment and begin anxiously fretting about something that may or may not ever come to pass. Our anxiety is prone to overestimating how bad things will be and underestimating our ability to handle whatever comes to pass. And this leads to unneeded suffering. The Buddha described this situation as the 2 arrows. The first arrow brings the suffering that's inevitable in the course of a life. It's neutral, impersonal, unavoidable. As we already noted, to exist is to experience some suffering. The second arrow, though, is the one we shoot at ourselves by assigning aversion or other negative reactions to the suffering. The second arrow is avoidable. The act of avoiding the suffering that could be coming our way is to refrain from shooting that second self-inflicted arrow. Those who have committed to endurance sports know that if you want to perform well, some suffering is inevitable. If you want to see what you're made of, how long or how fast you can go, you must confront this edge. In fact, changing your relationship to suffering is probably much of what impels you to sign up for a marathon, a triathlon, or a thru hike. Those of us who seek these experiences want to leverage the inevitability of suffering and use it as a forge for our souls, to go into the fire and use it to burn away the non-essential parts of our being. We see the training and the race as a laboratory where we conduct research on the nature and meaning of our existence. In this way, we court and confront suffering intentionally to build our comfort with it so that when it arises in the course of life, we don't increase it by resisting it. Another way to think of this is to recognize moments when unfounded fear creates more suffering than what you're actually afraid of. Alexandra hated shots and needles as a child. There was no real reason for this. They didn't really hurt. They were over quickly, and they were infrequent in her relatively healthy childhood. The suffering of a momentary vaccine was far overshadowed by the suffering caused by the irrational fear that Alexandra felt at the prospect of getting a shot. That sort of unnecessary suffering is exactly what we want to and can avoid. Alexandra, side note, I think you can tell Serafina's ear piercing story after the last paragraph here. The word for this avoidable suffering, dukkha, literally means bad axle space, referring to the cutout at the center of a wheel that allows it to turn smoothly. When this axle hole is out of alignment, when it's off center or cut unevenly, it takes more effort for the wheel to spin. The ride is more bumpy. The wheel itself wears down sooner. Similarly, dukkha stems from being out of alignment with your values, with reality, and with the truth of the present moment. You come back into alignment by ceasing resistance to the now. The side note about dukkha is that Sandy Raper is another North Carolina yoga teacher trainer, and her husband went to Carolina. And so she thought it was hilarious that I used as a mnemonic that dukkha, bad axle space, just kind of reminds you it's duke. That's how you remember it's bad versus sukha, which is good. And also sukha is well balanced. It means that the center hole is really well centered within the other hole, within the wheel itself, and it looks a lot like a Krispy Kreme donut. But to also further contextualize, Alexandra, tell us about Serafina's ear piercing.
Well, it's funny you should mention that because I was thinking of another story about her that happened this week that is quite similar, also proving the earlier discussion point, which is that we often come back to the same things again and again. So the story that you're referencing, Sage, is when my daughter, who is now 11, when she really wanted to get her ears pierced, she experienced just endless suffering and concern about how much it would hurt. And we went to a piercer and she backed out, and we made an appointment somewhere else and she backed out, and we finally went to a doctor to have her ears pierced, and she was crying and holding onto my hand and like sweating, and like the piercing happened, and her response was like, "Oh," and it was like, "Nothing. It's no big deal." But there had been like agonizing months leading up to this moment. This, where clearly the suffering and fear definitely eclipsed the actual piercing. But similarly, this week she has so she still has a little fear of needles and a little fear of shots. I don't know where she gets that from. Crazy. But she has this week an upcoming well child visit, her annual well child appointment. And she said, "Mom, do I have to get any vaccines?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know, maybe." And then she immediately started to spin herself up like, "Oh, I'm so worried." I was like, "It's like a week out, kiddo. Are we gonna like live in suffering for a week over something that takes that long?" So it's interesting. She's both learned the lesson and she's still learning the lesson. As we all are, right, Sage?
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, I love that we have these samskara, these patterns, and then we just kinda stay in that groove that we built for sure.
So
Yeah.
so did you have a moment this week or anytime in the last week where you noticed you shot yourself with a second arrow?
Oh boy, there probably too many to count. Let's see. Um Well, it's just like basically any storytelling that I do about something is just like perpetuating it, right? And if you want to move on, you need to kind of be forgetful. So I think for me, the avoidance, the pulling my punch on the second arrow is often just having a really great sense of brain reset, like a shake the etch a sketch. And I'm really good at forgetting things. And sometimes I get like on interviews and people say, "Tell me about a time when blah blah blah." And I'm like, when you had some drama at your yoga studio or whatever, I'm like, I don't know, I can't remember because I have suppressed it all. So, for me, the suppression is, I think, a self-defense mechanism, but
Yeah.
also, like, to defend myself from shooting myself with that second arrow.
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes absolute sense. That's interesting. It's a good way. It's a good little coping tool you've developed. Thank you.
Exactly, and before we go on to having you read, I'm gonna spotlight this great question that Cindy asked because it's relative to this chapter itself. She asked, "Do we consider Buddhism to be part of yoga philosophy or think of it as a separate but related philosophical system?" I would say the latter, but the Buddha came out of South Asia, and there is a whole lot of intertwining here. But this book does go a little bit beyond. It has some pop cultural references. It draws a little bit on other related wisdom traditions. And as Alexandra wrote most of the really great introduction, as she says, like even the yoga itself is not one homogenized system. It is a really multivariant system with a lot of separate strands and traditions put together in it. So I would think of it as separate and related.
Yeah, I think of yoga as like a really messy French braid. And so, you've got the main plait of the hair is like yoga, sort of our most ancient philosophical practice of yoga. But then weaving into that messy French braid is a lot of the class system from India. And weaving into that French braid is a lot of Hinduism, big strands of Hinduism. And weaving into that French braid is definitely Buddhism as well. And, Cindy, you probably know this, and others probably know this, but we see a lot of words and ideas and philosophical concepts from Buddhism that show up in yoga. A lot of the concepts from the sutras, matter of fact, ahimsa, non-harming, is the Buddhist concept as well. So we see a lot of that sort of mix up, that beautiful, messy French braid. So yeah, yoga is definitely includes some Buddhist thought. And certainly, I don't know that we could undo that French braid to really even tell where things, when they joined and when they separate.
Yeah, I love it. Great. Alexandra, what are you going to read to us?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I think I'm going to read chapter 35, the lesson on of letting, because it feels relevant to some of our conversations from today already. Okay. Love my readers these days now. The lesson of letting. The main lesson of the Bhagavad Gita might be summarized. Do your duty with no attachment to results. The question then becomes, what is your duty? For Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, it was to be a brave warrior. In our modern, complicated lives, we often owe allegiance or have responsibilities to more than one person. You may be a partner or spouse, and also a parent to humans or four-legged kids. You might additionally be a friend, a sibling, a child, or a colleague. In all of these roles, there is duty. And in all of these roles, it's highly tempting to attach that duty to some specific expected outcome. Consider the role of a parent and the work inherent in that role. A parent is responsible for being kind and loving, setting appropriate boundaries, and offering comfort and support. As parents ourselves, we know that the work of parenting is often a thankless task, especially the first few hands-on, low-sleep years. But as parents, we don't love our children as part of a specific plan that leads to a certain outcome. We don't nurture our children with an end goal in mind. Instead, we adore and celebrate our children because that's our duty as parents. Doing that duty feels good, and it's how it's supposed to be, regardless of who our children become or how they turn out. That part is out of our hands. This understanding is not an easy one to arrive at. Often, we do our duty in a role with an end result in mind, either consciously or unconsciously. For instance, you might expect reciprocation when you do something kind for your partner. You might expect praise when you go above or beyond in the workplace. The key word in this is expect. To do your duty with no attachment to results is to deeply comprehend the truth at hand. What is in your control is only ever your own actions. Anyone else's actions are not in your control. When you know that to be true, you move in the world concerned only with your own duty. You allow. You let.
Let that book go out into the world
Great.
and just be there.
I was thinking of you looking down on your daughter and their swim lessons. It's like we have to, you put them in swim lessons with the hopeful intended outcome that they become good swimmers, but you can't make that outcome happen and you have to let go of that outcome. You just put them out there and hopefully see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. And versus you talk about four-legged pets. Most of our pets are four-legged, right? Four-legged kids. That's certainly how we taught our dog to swim, was literally our friend just threw him in the lake. And he was like, ah, he came back out. And then he was a water dog. He absolutely loved it. But we don't quite do that to our children, like I said, with them, a swim instructor. But yeah, this is one of the seminal lessons of my life, of our lives, of the Bhagavad Gita. Again, talking about like this messy French braid of traditions that goes together into the system that we just call by the four-letter shorthand yoga. Yeah, do your duty without attachment to results. And I love that, like, then the question becomes, what is your duty? It's like, what is my life assignment? It's your annual birthday year in review question.
Yeah, it's an important question. What is the point? And then you get to decide whether or not you're doing pretty well in that assignment or not. That's a whole other question. So.
Do you do a self-assessment annually?
You used to tell me years ago that when you would do like sort of self-reflection spa days, you would do what are they called?
SWOT analysis. Mm-hmm.
I've never been quite as organized as you, so no. Mine is not quite so reflective, or it doesn't get written out quite so reflectively. But yeah, I do. I do a little self-assessment. I think we all do probably in those moments in life where there's milestones.
Yeah. Let's just point to, we don't need to read them out loud, but to the actions that go along with the chapters that we made, because I want folks to see how applicable this book is going to be to their daily lives. So the actions for the chapter I read about, which was talking about the two arrows and the inevitability of suffering, one of them, it says actions, cold plunge. Back in my running days, it was de rigueur. Like after your long run, I would come home and I would dump the whole ice tray in and like sit in an ice bath. As part of my research on my book, The Athlete's Guide to Recovery, I did a lot of looking into the actual replicable research about whether ice baths are truly useful for recovery, and the jury is out or has decided like, no. I have landed at the conclusion that ice baths are hazing. That is something that happens to athletes as they come up. As runners, their coach had it happen to them, and then like any hazing, they just kind of pass it along. But it is an opportunity in the cold plunge to start to discern between discomfort and pain and to develop a new relationship with suffering, especially if you were the one who chose to get in. Our other suggested action here is reflect on anticipation versus reality. And that's exactly what you were talking about, like Serafina's anticipation of maybe needing to get a vaccine at her appointment next week, or her anticipation of the pain that she expected to come along with getting her ears pierced is really a giant second arrow, and it's creating more suffering for us that is to be avoided, that is not to happen.
Yeah, those are such good actions to reflect upon. I love those. It's To me, the actions part of this book are really what makes this book so valuable, because it's not just you and I sharing our thoughts and our acquired wisdom on yoga philosophy, but it's also us offering readers an opportunity to apply this to themselves, to self-reflect the way that we talked about how important self-reflection is. So in the chapter that I read, The Lesson of Letting, chapter 35, the actions are to temper your expectations and to question your disappointments. And I think these are both really about looking at that idea of expectations. What are you expecting? And specifically with tempering your expectations, we wrote something like, you can apply this when you try a new restaurant, take a trip to a place you've never been, or sit down to watch a recommended movie. What expectations do you have? And I think we've all had the experience in life of doing something, going to an event or trying something where we had no expectations. And thus we were like joyfully surprised at how delightful the situation or restaurant or whatever turned out to be. Versus if we have some sense of expectations, this is supposed to be a good, expensive restaurant. And then we go and we find it to not be worth the money or not simply be that good, then indeed that expectations have really been the problem, you know. Perhaps if we went in with no expectations, we would have had a better or different experience. So I really think that's about tempering expectations and then question your disappointments. A lot of the times, our disappointments are about wanting someone else to have acted differently in a scenario. And a lot of disappointments are about attachment to expected results. So I think that's a helpful thing. Like, what is your great disappointment if you have one in life? And how is that attached to an expectation? How is that attached to your hoped for results?
Deep. Very, very deep, very good. So, thanks, Jenny, for that question. We'll come to questions again in just a minute, and those of you who have other questions, if you're on the live call, look for the caption bubble with the question mark in it and drop any questions for us. One thing that we get into toward the end of this book are actions so that you can do yoga in 1 minute, so that you can do yoga in 15 minutes in a day, or in a half day, or also actions that you might take every day, that you might take once a week, that you might take monthly, and so on annually, like Alexandra's birthday reflection. Alexandra, in a sec, I'm going to ask you which of these is your favorite, because I was just flipping through before we got onto this. And I was like, oh, I love this one. Annually schedule a retreat, because I would love to be told you should schedule a retreat. But what we say in the book is, depending on your budget and time, this can be a formal visit to a retreat center, a destination experience, or a DIY staycation. And I will use this as an opportunity for a little bit of cross promotion. Those of you who are watching live are already here at Comfort Zone Yoga. If you haven't already completed the onboarding challenge, which is like introduce yourself, ask a question, and comment on somebody else's question. Once you've done that, I will unlock for you a little stay home at home retreat course that you can do over the course of 2 days. It's called 2 Days to Transformation. And in day one, we talk about setting something down, letting something go. And in day two, we think, now that we have made that space, what do we want to fill it with? Or maybe we want to just protect that space and keep that space. So on day two, the prompts are all about, what do you want to pick up? So that's an example of how you could DIY a retreat. And I think that this is a wonderful thing to do annually, whether it looks like Alexandra's birthday reflection or she's so right. I used to not own a spa. It's tough to remember a time before I owned a spa, because it's been 10 years now. But back in the day, a spa day was a rarer thing for me. I would take maybe 2 or 3 a year, and I would go all day. I would stay all day. I would go for a long run beforehand, and I would go flop around in the water, sit in my robe, and do some deep reflection, have treatment, keep up with the deep reflection, and really draw it out as long as possible. And I would write a SWOT analysis that's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And strengths and weaknesses are inner, and opportunities and threats are outer, like in your relationships. Or often we do this in the world of business. So, what are the internal strengths and weaknesses of the organization, and what are the opportunities and threats coming from the landscape for the organization as it seeks to grow? So those are some examples of what your annual retreat might look like as well. And I would love to hear from any of you in the chat that have a ritual around this, what it looks like for you. Alexandra, what's your favorite of those actions toward the end?
Oh, I love our monthly watch something Sattvic. My because I have a kiddo who can't watch things that aren't too Sattvic. I'm often drawn to watch things that I wouldn't have chosen to watch on my own. Like we watched recently this very sweet movie called The Sheep Detectives.
Mhm.
The premise is a bunch of sheep solve a murder, and it's like the most sweet philosophical movie. It really is sort of like Knives Out for kids. It's like the sweetest thing. But I love that because sometimes, I know I'm not drawn to watching a nature documentary or something like that, but I find that it moves me, more than my normal true crime or whatever I'm drawn to would.
I think that's where it's useful to watch things in conjunction with other people because they will help us like go against our typical nature. Because again, this concept of samskara, we get into the habits like, yeah, when I sit down, I always pop on reality. That's not me. I don't actually watch
Right.
reality.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But yeah.
Well, so then how do we break free of that mold? Yeah.
Yeah.
I gotta ask you about Sheep Detectives later off because I read the book and I haven't seen the movie, and the book goes to some places that would not be, like, kid really
There were some moments, but
okay.
was the book as philosophical as you think the movie
It
might?
was it was
Yeah, I had no expectations. I had no expectations, and I was pleasantly surprised by it.
nice. Cool. I'm gonna pull up Jenny's great question, which is always a good one to ask at a book talk like this. How did you get the idea to write this book? I will answer that easily. Alexandra.
I think we got really interested in yoga philosophy and its applicability to our teaching at the same time, and from that interest came teaching yoga beyond the poses. And, then we did our second volume of that, which was just such a wonderful way to explore more yoga philosophical themes and how they can work for us as teachers. But I think actually this book is a natural progression of, well, at least for me, I won't speak for you, but I'm doing less yoga teaching these days. I'm still teaching yoga, but fewer classes than I've taught in the past. And that feels like the right fit for my life right now. And so I feel like it's a natural progression that I now want to think about yoga philosophy, not just from the lens of a teacher or through the lens of a teacher to my students, but also through the lens of someone who could use it in my daily life, even if I'm not getting to the mat as much as I used to. Because although I'm not doing the physical practice of yoga or I'm not teaching it as much as I used to, yoga is still the guiding philosophical heart of my life. And so I want to look at yoga philosophy more as a householder and less as a yoga teacher right now.
I love it. Yeah, I remember when we were first talking about this, it was a concept for a book that you had, and you were talking about secular spirituality. And I think that is something that we landed on a really inclusive call in this book. But can you define secular spirituality for us and maybe give folks who are listening a chance, a taste of what the book offers on that topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think to talk about this, I think I have to talk about my own upbringing a little bit because it's always relevant and germane to me. And that is that my father was a lapsed Catholic, and my mom was always a very vehement agnostic, atheist, a little bit of both. And so I didn't grow up in a religious household at all, but I grew up in a household that was deeply spiritual. And so there was a lot of ritual in my household, and there was a lot of focus on like family connection and holding hands and honoring very special moments. And so there was a lot of like deeply spiritual stuff going on in my household without the framework of religion. And so moving into adulthood, I think I was looking to harness my own sense of spirituality and attach it to something. But when I did look at any sort of religious framework, it always felt too dogmatic to me. It always felt too, this is the way things are. It just didn't ever resonate with me. And so yoga philosophy for me personally was the first time that I thought like, oh, this is how I see the world. And there are some very clear ways that yoga philosophy, speaks to the spirituality that I've already found in myself. So I'm not taking something on. I'm just like finding a way to express what's already there. And so that's really what secular spirituality means to me. It's harnessing these sort of philosophical and spiritual ideas that pre-exist without there being any sort of have to or must or this is the way it is attached to it. Anything else you'd add to that, Sage? What else
No,
would you
I think that's just perfect. Absolutely perfect. And one thing I think that we can move into here as we move toward landing this call is, okay, this is a general population book. It is separate from these other two books that are written for yoga teachers. But how could the folks who are here on the live call, who I imagine are all yoga teachers, how could they layer this book, like literally, on top of these other two and come up with a delicious sandwich of things that they can offer to their students? What's your vision for that?
Yeah, I love that question too. And I think it kind of goes back to something I just said, which is that I'm teaching a little bit less. And I'm anchoring to that because I recognize that's just a period of time in my life that might shift again. But my reason for teaching a little bit less right now is that I'm a little more interested in making sure my well is full versus kind of running on fumes. And I think personally it's because I have a tween now, and that is just a different energy relationship happening in my household, but I digress. But for yoga teachers, I see this book, Yoga Off the Mat, as really being less about like, how do I serve my student population? Which is such an important question when you're a yoga teacher. But I see this book being more about like, how do I serve myself? How do I give to myself a little bit? And this book is not about like what you should do. It's not about that. It's just about how do I do some self reflection that's kind and loving and might allow me to move forward in my own sense of spiritual growth. And that is not necessarily something that I have to digest to bring to my students. You might, but that it really is a gift for yourself and for others that have an interest in yoga spirituality.
I love it. Yeah, that's fantastic. I think for readers who are familiar with teaching yoga beyond the poses, they'll know that we have a template framework for theming a yoga class. And I've done some calls in here in comfort zone conversations about theming and presented both like a junior varsity model and then the full one that we do in the book. And basically, it's like you come up with a concept. You think through a way to make it both personal and universal. And the universal is how your students will know that it applies to them. And I think people who are reading this will very quickly be able to see like, oh, I can think of times in my life and those actions that every chapter ends with are pointing me toward a way to make it personal. And then I can just ask some open-ended questions. And that's how my students can fill in the blank to make it universal. And then I'll again kind of pull it back into being personal for them. And then we hit the idea more than once over the course of class. A good theme doesn't just show up at the beginning and the end as bookends. A good theme is really woven entirely through the whole class. And some advice I was giving somebody in my mentorship program just yesterday is hit it hard when you think like I am really like beating this down. That's about the right amount of iterations of the theme for your students actually to have heard one of them. Like it needs to feel like overkill to us as teachers to land with the students. So I think you will find a lot of different things. Maybe you'll bring this in and read a tiny bit out of it in class. Maybe it will prompt you to write your own Dharma talk or opening spiel for the beginning of class. Or maybe it will just make you feel a little bit more connected and a step closer toward liberation. And that would be a huge win for us as well. I see a great question from Karen, and I'm going to pull it up. It is, were there any topics or chapters that didn't make it in the book? Can I turn us in a little bit on our word count story?
Oh,
Sure.
yes, please.
So yes, but before we get to that, we actually had the opposite issue right toward the end of drafting. The two of us have complementary writing styles. Mine is the turtle. I like to go drip by drip and kind of set myself a word count and like burp, burp, plug away at it. And then Alexandra likes to sweep in on a wave of inspiration and write tens of thousands of words in a weekend, often the last weekend that before the manuscript is due. And
That was just this book. I think it was better until this one.
it really is complimentary. It truly is. So we were getting there, and Alexander's like, "I've got it from here. Don't worry. Like I'm going to run this one." It's kind of like running a relay where you're passing the baton. I was like, "Okay, great." And I remember like, "Oh, I'm done. I'm gonna sit and take a weekend because all we need to do is get to 35,000 words." And, then on Sunday morning, I was like, "Let me just check that the contract said 35,000 words." Reader, the contract did not say 35,000 words. The contract said 45,000 words. We're like, "What other topics do we want to put in?" And we actually came up with a host of many other topics that we thought we could put in, and then we did get to cherry pick from those. But some of the models of being, we originally were like, "Yeah, they get it." Not redundant, but they are all various paths up the same face of the mountain, not even just the same mountain. But then we did have room, realizing that our word count was more generous than we had presumed, because our previous book had been 35,000. I didn't pull that number out of nowhere. And I know, oh, we always go over. So I remember when we came to contract this book, I was like, all right, let's make it bigger. I did it to myself. That's a second arrow. Oh, look at the
Overcorrection. I remember feeling like, "Oh, no, we have more to write," and then it was like, "Oh, good, we have more to write. There's more to say," and, "Oh, yeah, we get to talk about this now." So it was a
Yeah.
blessing, of course, for sure, and obviously a blessing in the end.
Can you remember what got left on the cutting room floor, as it were, or when you were reading the book? Because we just did the audiobook recording here. Can you remember any that you're like, "Oh, that would have fit nicely there?"
I don't. I really nothing is coming to mind. I think we may have had more stuff that came from tantra yoga that got cut.
Mhm.
We do have several ideas that come from that, area of yoga or that era of yoga, but I can't remember anything specific, and, I think that speaks to the idea that there's always more to say about yoga philosophy. But what about you? Do you remember anything?
I do remember that we cut a few of the sutras because we
Mhm.
felt like that was territory that had been well covered by other fantastic authors in other books,
Mhm.
and that we didn't want to inflate the significance of the sutras when yoga philosophy is richer than just this one text. And sometimes it gets held up as this, you know, people want to equate it to the Bible and say, like, this is the seminal text, and that's not the case. So while it is important, there are plenty of other ones. And so we chose deliberately to not go and put in a whole bunch more from the sutras. We do open with the sutras and then pull on them throughout the book, but it isn't only a book that is here to unpack the Yoga Sutras.
Yeah, I think for most of us, if we're yoga teachers or we've had any significant yoga training, then we have, encountered the sutras many times, and there's as you pointed out, that's a rich text, there's so much more to learn from it. We could read that many times more and get more out of it, but to your point, there's so much more to pull from, and we really did try to pull from more. And again, there's like this is a fraction of the things we could have talked about. There are so many ideas that encompass what is yoga, so many philosophical ideas to play with and talk about.
Exactly. Great. Okay. Well, with this, I'm going to start to wrap us up and cede time back to those of you who took time out of your day. Thank you so much for your presence today on the live call. It's always fun to see actual numbers on the live participants board. And thanks for engaging in the chat and telling us who you are and where you came from. The next comfort zone conversation will be, I think, the third. No, I am traveling on the 3rd, August 27th at 2 o'clock. Yin yoga, what most teachers get wrong. What could it be? Come tune in on August 27th to find out. That will also be a replay. Karen, thank you so much for saying you have a shelf of books of ours in your yoga teacher library. And thank you also for sending them to folks who graduate from 200. That is exactly who we are writing for. And in this book, we're trying to cast the net just a little bit broader. So give it to all your friends, everybody you know. This book is really for everybody. And I hope y'all read, listen, enjoy. And when you do, we would be deeply grateful for a 5-star rating. And even if you have time, a review on your favorite bookseller site. It does not need to be the big one. It could be any. Goodreads, Barnes and Noble, Indigo, if you're in Canada, Powell's Bookstore, any of these are places where you can leave a review. You can also, of course, always give a 5-star rating to audiobooks on Audible or where you get your audiobooks, because you'll get to hear both of us in alternation when you come through and listen to the audiobook for this. So thanks everybody for being here. Thank you, Alexandra,
Thank you
for
for having me,
being here.
Paige. Yeah, it's
Oh,
great.
it's always a total blast. And thanks to those of you in the chat for saying your thank yous. I hope to see you on the next one.